Alrighty, let's get cracking. All right, everybody. Welcome to, first of all, thanks for joining live for this webinar. For those of you who are watching, hope this brings you some, or watching the recording, hope it brings you some value as well. So welcome to the shift from your company's great resignation to great retention. First of all, my name is Daniel Anderson. I am the product manager here at Valo and also a Microsoft MVP. The star of the show today and the star of this webinar is actually going to be Mr. Jon Ingham, who is the director of the Strategic HR Academy, and also a global top 100 HR influencer as well. So a wealth of knowledge that you are going to have the privilege of listening to today. So welcome, Jon. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Daniel. Great to be with you and everybody else as well. Looking forward to our conversation around the Great Resignation. Just as a little bit more introduction to me as well. I am a consultant, a trainer, conference speaker, do various different things. I'm an author, so my last book, The Social Organisation, and yes, most of my time goes into the academy for HR practitioners focused on strategic HR topics that Daniel referred to. And from my perspective, a focus around strategic HR is about prioritization, and in particular prioritization on the qualities that we're trying to create in people and organization to drive business performance. So I talk about outcomes or capabilities that we're trying to create in the organization. So things and terms which aren't always that resonant for people because they don't sound very nice, but actually they are very useful and progressive and humanistic terms. So things like human capital, and I'm not talking about people when I talk about human capital, let's call people, but human capital is the value we create in people that enables an organization to provide value to the business. Organization capital, the value of the way that we organize people and work, and also social capital, which was what my book focused on, the value of the connections, the relationships and conversations taking place within an organization. And I mentioned that partly because that is sort of my focus when I work with HR practitioners, but also actually I think that's a really good focus for the digital workplace as well. We all work together to create those outcomes in an organization that enables a business to succeed. And I'll be referring to a couple of those points as I go through the content today. And there is one more thing as well before so I've got a couple of slides just sharing a little bit of content that I thought would be useful for us to have a look at, and then the main idea is that Daniel, you and I can have a sort of conversation around those, and as we sort of go through, perhaps sort of broaden that out and get some inputs from everybody else who are with us live as well. So just one more thing before I dive into that content is just to say that focus around strategic outcomes has been really important for a couple of decades now. But clearly, going through the pandemic and in the Great Resignation, everything has changed. And to me, the key thing there is that HR needs to be strategic, but it also needs to be, not just HR, organizations need to focus strategically on their people. But we also today need to focus on being much more people-centric than we have in the past. And the reason for that is the agenda of this webinar, this Great Resignation that we're working through currently. So I thought it'd be worthwhile just starting with just a reminder of what this thing is, because we've sort of taken this term, the Great Resignation, and every organisation or every person sort of refines it and defines it in their own way. And indeed, there's now these sort of multiple great, fill in your own word, possibly beginning with R, maybe not. But I think the way it was defined originally by Anthony Klotz was quite useful. So he was talking about the four sort of main bullet points here. That firstly, we are seeing this wave of increased resignations, partly because nobody was resigning, nobody was moving as we actually went through the pandemic itself. So partly is just sort of catching up on the lack of resignation, and we're experiencing a lot of people moving from one organisation to another simply because they probably would have done that a couple of years ago in normal times. Some people are leaving the workforce, they're retiring or they're looking for other opportunities, and part of that is that people are burnt out. We've all been working so hard and in such difficult environments very often, that people just really could do with taking a bit of a breather, and people are doing that. So that's definitely part of what we're seeing as well. But the third one is the key one for me. And, some people are calling this time the Great Renewal. And I think that's quite a good term as well, because it's not just people leaving the workforce, and that's definitely happening, particularly in the States where the term originated. In the UK, where I am, it's definitely occurring in some sectors as well. Daniel, I think it's prevalent in Australia as well. We might get onto that later. But the main thing behind those resignations, and even in those countries or sectors where perhaps we're not seeing people leaving necessarily, but people are still questioning, why they're working for a particular organisation and what they're trying to achieve. So it is this thing about a search for meaning, a reflection on what people want to achieve in their lives. And it comes from something psychologists talk about, this idea of there's a terror management theory, that when people are exposed to death or serious illness and so on, they take a moment to take stock and just to sort of reconsider what they're doing with their lives. And I think that's the main thing that we're seeing at the moment. It's people are questioning, what do we want to achieve? So even if they're not resigning, even if they're not moving on, they're after more. And I think as organizations and HR, digital workplace practitioners and others, we really need to respond to that, because otherwise, we are going to see the Great Resignation impact us quite badly.
On the topic of burnout and maybe I guess it ties into the other little points you got there as well about the autonomy and things like that. Especially over the last few years, obviously with the pandemic and the need to be working at home and in lockdowns and things like that. What I've heard and seen and come across is that people are really finding it hard to, I guess, switch off from work. They're tending to feel like they're working constantly and all the time, and that probably does tend to lead to that that burnout as well. And especially when they're reflecting on is this really the way I want to be working? Do I want to be thinking I need to be working all the time because of I might have my computer or devices or things like that on the kitchen table or wherever we're working from, and inadvertently we're probably tending to work a lot more than we probably were in the past even.
It's a really good point. So absolutely. I mean, there's a number of things that have been sort of part of this. I mean, that yes, absolutely. That fourth bullet point about autonomy is part of it. People have got used to sort of having more control over what they do, and they don't want to lose that. There's the lack of commute, that used to give people a little bit of sort of psychological separation from work, which isn't happening anymore. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the research, academic research, the Microsoft report that's a lot of people have come across, looking at actual data of what people are doing in their organizations. And yes, you can see that people are at their computers longer than they were before. So although from a business perspective, we've sort of managed better than we probably thought we were going to, and productivity, if you're not paying too much attention to actually the increased amount of time that people are working at, or productivity or performance has well, it depends on the type of job, but in many areas has actually increased, which wasn't what we expected. But yeah, completely, there's a human consequence of that, and it's not a positive one for many people. And I've been very impressed by how much more focus organisations have put into things like well-being during the pandemic. But we've had to do that, and even with that increased investment, I still think that a lot of people have struggled. So it's not a surprise that we're seeing the Great Resignation, but I do think it's something that we need to to really focus on. Firstly, to understand why it's happening, and secondly, to respond to it in a prioritized, deliberate sort of way. The other 3 point, so those were Anthony Klutz's ideas. My own addition to that is I just think, going back years and decades, organizations haven't always managed people in the way that perhaps we should have done, with sort of hindsight and sort of understanding that this more people-centric approach over the last couple of years can have benefits. So I think there is, there's a sort of a build-up of lack of trust, or
yeah, that's interesting, because I think you've probably seen it as well, but around this almost micromanagement type of thing, where even organizations have not really trusted their employees to get work done and things like that, and now they've tended to, or they've had to give up some of that that control, I guess, and really trust their employees to be doing the work, and because they're at home, they might be doing other things and being able to do that. And what I've seen is the productivity is actually increased in some instances, because people aren't or people are able to work when they want. They can get their job done. They can do their tasks when they want, and things like that. And I think the management side of things have now started to realize, well, hey, maybe we can give a little bit of leeway here and not lock people into 9 to 5, and give some a hell of a lot more flexibility and things like that. I think that's obviously almost, well, not mainstream, but I think it's increased a lot in that respect.
Yeah. I mean, organisations have been changing. Nothing's been static, and you look at the large-scale move towards agile and our digital tools and everything that we were doing differently before the pandemic. But looking back, that clearly wasn't enough. There were a lot more opportunities to balance or combine a business focus and a more human one as well, which I think we've understood much more deeply since sort of having to work in those ways. And I think, I mean, one of the reasons I sort of made that point on the slide is that I do think it's a bit of a crunch time at the moment. So we've had to introduce a more people-centric way of working just to get us through the pandemic. It's been a very successful approach in the main. But it's been a sort of reactive response to a crisis situation, and this is what I'm sort of talking about really in terms of that the next bullet point on sort of perhaps reducing support in some areas, sort of post-pandemic or going out of the pandemic, which is I do think there is there's some behavior in some places which sort of suggests that business leaders are now saying, okay, you've had your holiday, you've had your couple of years at home, let's get back in the office, get back to the old ways of doing things. And that would be a shame if that's what we do. And the opportunity or the requirement, I think, at the moment is to grab hold of that more people-centric way of working that we've developed over the pandemic and use that as the basis or the motor to take our organizations forward. But to use that more sort of people-centric approach strategically as the driver for sort of business success in the future. And I really, really hope that we do sort of take that opportunity. And obviously, the topics that we're talking about today are clearly part of that as well. Oh, and just to finish on this slide, the dumb things that some organizations are doing. Let's everybody be in 3 days a week, and you can spend the entire day on Zoom. Is just it's why why would we do that? There are some really positive opportunities of using the physical workplace to supplement what we can do digitally, but let's be smart about why and what that is.
With just before we jump onto the next slide, around the I guess the reduction in support, why do you think businesses or organizations are going that way of actually reducing support?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say this is a huge trend, but I've certainly seen some evidence to suggest that some organizations are starting to sort of roll back on their well-being benefits, for example. But more than that, I think it is more just about I was sort of thinking more about the broad approach to people and work rather than sort of specific initiatives. So yeah, it's just well, you can see it, I think, in some of those organizations which are now trying to get people back into the office or the workplace, and a desire in some areas to sort of return to the old normal. And any research about the perceptions of the workforce suggests that's not what people want. And I can understand why some businesses want certain things, because there are constraints around collaboration and so on without that face-to-face connection and the sort of more deeper relationships that you can establish when people are together in person. But I think sort of implementing that and enforcing that without this supplementary people-centric perspective and finding ways to organize people and work in a way that will achieve what the business needs, but also in a way to achieve what the workforce needs. I think that's just really short term and probably isn't going to work that well.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it's interesting times. So this is my sort of read on sort of what we need to do at the moment, really. And some of this is clearly just a continuation of things that we've done for quite some time, dating well back before the pandemic. But I think some of it is quite new. So employee experience, absolutely, and digital workplace experience as well. Absolutely essential, fundamental. If people have a poor experience in doing what they need to do, it's just such a good way of turning people off. Let's not do that. Let's give them the positive, compelling experience that people clearly need. And I think that people need more than that. And this is perhaps the change from the pandemic, that for me, people don't come to work for a good experience of work. That's essential, and people come to work to achieve something, to do something, to grow, to develop, to deliver a legacy. I mean, people have different motivators, but the experience of work is sort of part of the ways they achieve that. But if we really want to motivate people and retain them inside an organization, I think the new build on what we've always been doing is about understanding why people come to work other than receiving a salary. Finding out about that, understanding the psychology, understanding what's going on within our own individual organization, finding out the motivators of our individual employees, and starting to deliver that in a much more effective way than we've typically done. And that potentially, if you take that lens to the way that we manage, develop, organize people, I think that starts to help us think differently in a number of different areas. And the most obvious one may be, what do we do to retain people? Because that is the clear consequence and issue caused by the Great Resignation at the moment. And we've always, most organizations for a long time have done exit interviews, and clearly that's a rather reactive, transactional type of approach. We're going to learn lessons, but we're not really going to be able to stop people leaving, because we only do exit interviews when people are already on their way out. So more strategically, for quite some time, organizations have been doing stay interviews. Let's just have ongoing conversations about what we would need to do to keep people. What do they want to achieve inside their organizations? But I think the issue about stay interviews is that they're sort of one-sided. They're what needs to change to keep you in the business. They're designed to help the business do what it needs to do, and sort of to do that by looking after people, but it's still the focus is still very much on the business. And I think where we're going is much more about sort of broader career development interviews. Let's have an honest, open, transparent conversation with you about what your motivations are, and how you might best be occupying your time. And perhaps that's in our organization, perhaps it's in your current job, perhaps it's about getting different experience in this organization, or perhaps it's something else. And let's focus on you rather than the business, and help you achieve what you want to do. And that might sound a rather odd suggestion at the moment when we're struggling with retention, but I think actually if we can move to that approach, more people would want to work for us, and more people would want to stay, because they can start to trust the way that the organization and their leaders are supporting them and thinking about them. So
And I think a big part of that is the first impressions as well, and especially around the employee experience. And we talk a lot about the importance of onboarding and things like that. And the main purpose of onboarding is setting up these new employees or new hires, or whatever you want to call that, that they're really setting them up for success from day one, and really I guess decreasing the time it takes for new people coming into the organization to be comfortable in their roles and feel at home and all of that type of thing, and really starting with that end goal in mind at the start of the onboarding process, and giving new people coming into the organization the best experience possible. And that goes a long way to making first of all a first good impression, but then allowing, and is a big differentiator for organizations, to then being able to retain their key talent, and invest in the organizations that are investing in that process are the ones that are going to be the successful ones, and are going to be able to retain that key talent as well. And I think through the pandemic and this hybrid or remote model of work, organizations have found it really hard to come up or have a really good onboarding process, being all virtual and things like that as well. So that's made it even more difficult to be able to have that process, that initial process up front.
Yeah, that's such a great example. And working mainly with HR people, this has been a core focus over the last couple of years, because it had to be. Beginning of the pandemic, we found out very quickly we needed to onboard people in a very different way. And I think a lot of the practitioners that I was talking about were quite surprised actually how different sort of remote onboarding had to be from what they've been doing previously, and how they had to be a lot more deliberate at very things which had previously been very simple, helping people to take up and immerse the culture, or to connect with people across the organization, which previously had just sort of happened by accident. But now, we sort of figured out we really needed to think through how we're going to make sure that took place, because if we didn't do it intentionally, it tended not to happen. And clearly the digital workplace has been, the essential way of making sure that onboarding did take place in the way that we wanted it to. I think it's also interesting because, I mean, in a sense, I'm now suggesting that in a sense you've got these sort of three objectives that you need to achieve. So there's the core business objectives, including those organization capabilities I was talking about at the beginning. How do we ensure that the organization is working for our business? We need to do that in a way that delivers a positive experience. And increasingly, there may be these sort of the individual, the personal objectives of our employees that we need to try to meet as well. And the balance of those, I think, will depend on the particular process or area of the organization that we're looking at. So onboarding, is mainly about employee experience, absolutely, because there may be some knowledge or skills that we need to impart during that onboarding process, but fundamentally it's about making sure that people feel that they've joined the right organization, and they sort of they're compelled to carry on working for us. So the experience is core. If you have a look at something like performance management, we know that the employee experience and performance management is pretty dreadful. So in a sense, that's one area where there's a huge opportunity for improvement in many organizations. But the fundamental objectives are, how do we help people perform? So the business objective of that. And I think in some areas, so actually, when I was an HR director quite some time ago, a couple of decades ago, but in an organisation that was very progressive and people-centric even back then. And one of the things we did was to make performance management a sort of a two-way conversation about the employment deal. So we'd talk to people about these are the objectives you need to achieve the business, but would also talk to them about how do you want to be engaged? How do you want the organisation to work with you over the next year, so that you're able to work towards those personal objectives that I was talking about. And that was a bit of a rarity a couple of decades ago, but I think it needs to be a much more sort of common type of approach today. So everything changes because of the situation that we're now in.
Yeah, and it's also about, especially if we go back to the onboarding, and I think you've written about this topic as well quite significantly, is about building strong relationships and connections and things like that, and that the start of that, starting to build strong relationships isn't really built, or you can't really build that on poor foundation. So obviously having a really good foundational starting point with a good onboarding process is going to obviously facilitate the building or the beginning of building those strong relationships inside of organizations as well, which is a core part to people feeling comfortable in their role and achieving what they need to as well, or they want to.
So as we become more people-centric, people are social. That's a fundamental characteristic of being human, and therefore part of being more people-centric is being more sort of socially centric as well. And that's always been important, and it's probably more important now than it's ever been. So absolutely, if we want people to cooperate and collaborate effectively with inside our organization, that should start, it has to start during onboarding. And, you know, we know, for example, that one of the most effective ways to create those early connections is to help people you know, find others that they need to work with or will be stakeholders with inside the organization, and to help pitch to those people the value that that new joiner can provide. You know, so rather than, oh, can we have half an hour and can you tell me all about the organization? Actually, the core need is, you know, this is me, these are my skills, these are my experiences, these are my perspectives, you know, this is the value I think I can provide for you. You know, that's where those connections, relationships tend to develop very effectively. So, you know, that I've got one client, for example, who as part of their transformation towards a more digital way of doing onboarding, brought in a quiz where they gave their new joiners the task of going out into the organization and finding people who could give them the answers as a way to start providing those initial connections. So again, there's a variety of different ways of doing this, and it does partly depend upon the nature of the organization and what they need people to have. And none of it is that difficult. You know, particularly now we have wonderful digital tools that can help all of this to happen. But the key thing that I think was missing in many organizations, again, is that sort of deliberate approach. You know, it's all the smart, strategic thinking. And I'm not, and when I say strategic, I don't mean convoluted. You know, this isn't something that's difficult. It's just something that we need to make time for. You know, if you know, what are our objectives? What do we need to achieve? What are the activities that are going to give us those objectives? And as long as we do that thinking, I think it's relatively simple to end up with some good approaches, which are going to give the business what it needs, employees what they need, and provide that positive experience as well.
Yeah, you talk a lot about being people-centric, and it's interesting you talk about that a lot because you know, there's, you know, technology itself. I mean, people throw technology or HR tech or whatever it is at the problem where you know, it's obviously you'd understand this as well. It's not a technology problem. I mean, most organizations or majority of organizations will be using a platform like Microsoft 365. I mean, it's the same, right? If every organization's got it, they've got the same set of tools. It's just about how we implement it and use it and use it to reach, you know, achieve the goals that we're setting out to achieve. And you touched on also the trend, the Microsoft report that was recently released as well, and that highlighted something that I took out of that report. Was there was a stat that, you know, there was an 87% increase in one-to-one chats, where there was a 5% decrease in channel activity in Microsoft Teams. So there's more one-to-one conversations, but less cross-company type of collaboration. So where companies were probably starting to, you know, I'll say pre-pandemic, but starting to sort of open up and work out loud, as they say, and being able to connect with people from outside of their inner loop or their team that they're working with. It's kind of, although we've got this technology that allows for this, we're tending to see people going back into a little bit more siloed conversations and things like that. And then that has a direct impact to company innovation and all of that cultural type of thing as well. So you know, having the technology isn't a be all and end all. It's actually how organizations implement and use and do all that type of thing with it.
Yes, I'm just trying to where shall I take that one? I mean, firstly, absolutely, completely. So yeah, I mean, the Microsoft report, I mean, is, well, yeah, it's got I mean, so many great insights in there. I think that was the report that came up with, in the States, something like what 40% of people are currently looking at resigning. And so absolutely. So their research shows, from looking at people's use of technology, people are spending longer at work, and hence the burnout thing we've talked about. You can have a look at sort of organization network analysis type statistics from, again, Microsoft or other tools, and again, there is evidence that type of collaboration that you were talking about has changed. So certainly in some organizations, I think sort of team level collaboration does seem to have improved, because people have had to be more deliberate about making time for conversations and team meetings and so on with others. But yeah, most of that data also suggests that it's the broader communication and cooperation across the organization that has probably seen the greatest declines. So it's those serendipitous connections, the people that we'd have bumped into in the corridor or around the water cooler thing.
Water cooler, yes.
That isn't happening anymore. I don't think we ever used to talk around a water cooler, but you know what I mean.
No, it's just become the term, hasn't it? It just everybody used to chat around the water cooler, didn't they?
Yeah. But there was it's the weak ties, the people that we sort of knew of, or if we'd bump into wherever it was, we'd sort of say hello to, and because the sort of focus is so much onto Teams at the moment, it's that other type of communication that's declined. And you see that in the same sort of data that whereas adoption of Teams has increased so much, you've not seen the same sort of impact with Yammer, for example, because most organizations haven't been as deliberate as perhaps they should have been about ensuring those sort of connections are taking place. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that, whether that's sort of social events or just sort of more semi-formal networks. I like the sort of the extension of the use of things like employee resource groups, ERGs, that various organizations have in place, and many have extended during the pandemic to sort of get people together with other people who've been experiencing the same sort of problems they have. I think that's a really sort of people-centric way of using these technologies that helps the individual and provides a basis for those sort of connections which otherwise tend to suffer. So again, it's not difficult. We just need to think it through and put the interventions in place that will sort of make things happen. And then on culture, can I take you through onto the next slide? Because in a sense, this was sort of my my input, which I think is perhaps my best response to what you were talking about, which is that absolutely we do need to think about culture. I tend not to talk about culture actually, because I think actually for me, the best way to develop culture is to do what we've been talking about, is to focus on the capabilities that the business needs and the whatever that our employees needs, which are the objectives on the left-hand side of this slide, and then deliver that through the organization. And the organization here, so the green circles are, this is the McKinsey 7S model, a fairly commonly used organization model to have a look at the different elements of an organization. It is rather dated today, so you do need to make sure that your organization models are appropriate and current and modern for the type of environment that we're working with today. And for me, a couple of key elements that we clearly need to add to any organization model in today's world are the physical workplace and the digital workplace, particularly while we're still sort of thinking through our response to hybrid working. That makes absolutely no sense for organization designers just to focus on structures and systems and sort of forget about the digital workplace in particular, which is sort of today's organization. I mean, that's the way that people experience the organization in today's world. So we do need to include those additional elements. And then the core point of having an organization model is that all of those different elements are sort of joined up and integrated and aligned towards meeting those organization capabilities and individual needs. And then the culture, to me, sort of emerges from all of that. The culture is always going to be different to the capabilities, and there are things you can do separately to influence the culture in terms of sort of participating in and influencing the conversations which are taking place as well. But for me, the culture arises out of sort of doing these things. So the key for me, again, is about being deliberate, understanding what we're trying to achieve, ensuring that we've got sort of clear objectives about how we want our organization to work, and then embedding that through all of our HR processes, the way we organize the digital workplace, and so on. And it really does. And I know from an employee experience perspective as well, that there are lots of conversations around the place about the need for employee experience to be provided through a collaborative approach. No one function can take responsibility for the entire employee experience, because we all have a piece of that. But the same thing is true here, in a sense. To deliver the capabilities we need and to deliver the culture that our people require and want to work within, we've all got to get together, because we all play a small role in doing this. Which is why I'm so delighted to be able to have this conversation with you, Daniel, because absolutely, HR can't do it, the digital workplace can't do it on their own, but practitioners working in these different areas need to be working together, probably much more than we often are, I think.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's often thought of as a HR thing, isn't it? But it's definitely more broad than that. And we talk about, it's often talk about the digital workplace experience, or the digital employee experience, where it's probably just needs to be the employee experience. That encompasses digital and physical and all of it's all encompassing, as opposed to siloed experiences as well. And rather than the employee experience being a HR, whether it's a HR function, it is cross organization, collaborative across all functions of the business. Yeah, definitely. But
and also, as we were talking about before, ensuring that we're sort of it's not a balance, it's not a choice, but it's an optimization of those. It's not how do we do onboarding and how do we do the digital workplace, but how do we use the digital workplace to deliver onboarding. So it's finding those synergies between our different capabilities as well.
So how do we create this? How do we create this great retention, Jon?
Well, that's my final slide that I thought would be useful to aid our conversation. So these are my suggestions. And the first one, the basic one, is just to continue what we've been doing. And again, it's about using the experience over the last couple of years and using that as the hook or the motor to progress. So it may need to be done in a slightly different way, but keeping that sort of people-centric approach that we've been developing. So continuing to focus on employee experience, well-being, flexible working, all of those sort of things, and then getting deeper. And I think getting deeper is about really understanding what does motivate people, and then delivering the things which will keep them motivated, which in general terms tend to be having a clear purpose for our organization so that people can find their own sense of meaning related to that purpose, giving people autonomy, which doesn't necessarily need to be the same autonomy that they've been experiencing in the pandemic, but ensuring that they do have the autonomy so they can develop in their own way and see a clear progression in what they're able to achieve. connecting people across the organization, which we've been talking quite a bit about, but just making clear, certainly when I was bringing up the topic of connections and social capital and so on within my introduction, absolutely, connections are important for the business. You know, our businesses are, the whole point of having an organization is that by bringing people together, people can achieve more than working individually. But to make that work, you have to invest in the connections and relationships between people as well as the people themselves. So relatedness is important for a business, but it's vitally important for people. And we did talk about that previously, didn't we? I was sort of making the point, yes, as we become more people-centric, we need to become more social as well, because we are such social beings. And then recognition, you know, I think recognition is vital, partly because it reinforces those other three things. You know, by being able to recognize people, we can make purpose clearer. We can enable greater autonomy, or because people sort of get that extrinsic reinforcement of what they've been able to do and the fact that they are progressing and so on. And then obviously because it's becoming from other people, it's sort of reinforcing that whole thing around relatedness as well. So that's sort of my second level. And then I think the perhaps the slightly more difficult one, but one that I think is becoming more and more important for organizations, is personalizing all of that as well. You know, everybody has needs for purpose, autonomy, and relatedness, but once you probe beneath that, we all have different motivations as well. And therefore, if we try to engage people or deliver a standard experience, we're never going to motivate anybody to the extent that they could find themselves motivated, because that sort of sheep dip approach doesn't work. You know, we have to go beyond that. And I think things like the idea of personas from design thinking, you know, really, really useful for HR and the digital workplace in order to start to sort of customize our approaches to different segments. And we have to go even further, and technologies, you know, helping us do that. So I think the big agenda for me is that piece around personalization. So, you know, if we want to, and we should want to, move from, you know, simply being impacted by the Great Resignation, and we want to move that to a great retention, you know, we've got lots of people who want to continue working with us because they're achieving what they want to achieve. These are the sort of fundamental things that I think we need to have a look at.
Yeah, great insights, great tips there. Now, just before we jump into a couple more slides that I'll finish off with as well, I just wanted to just to get a little bit of a few reactions flying around from the audience here. We do have a number of people on board here, so hopefully what Jon has been discussing here is resonating with everybody. So we are in a Microsoft Teams meeting, so if you want to just use the reactions, hit the hearts, hit the thumbs up, you know, let the reactions fly across the screen, and hopefully everything that you know, Jon's mentioning here is resonating with you all, giving you some good insights into what's happening as well. So there we go, Jon. Everybody's loving what you're saying, so that's it's good to see. We do have a few minutes left too, so we will be unmuting you all shortly as well. So please feel free to raise your hands and come off. And if you've got any questions for Jon, then you know, he's more than happy to take a few questions on board. But before we jump into that, we're talking a lot there, and Jon's just been talking about creating the great retention through HR, and a lot of that is around delivering digital experiences and things like that, and using you know, using technology and platforms and things like that to help facilitate that. Now, obviously, at Valo, we take this, you know, it's a core part of what we do as well, and we tend to look at the Valo experience as trying to help facilitate everything that you've just said there, and we've got a number of core pillars and things that we, you know, our products help facilitate there too, and we can see on that slide deck that we do have a lot of those, or hopefully those core principles around, transparent and targeted communication, belonging and inclusivity, access to content and information and things like that as well. But really with a key focus on analytics and insights, and being able to measure the impact of communications and people's activities across, well, in our case, Microsoft 365. So being able, we did touch on earlier about, everybody's got similar types of technology, but it's really how we implement it and how we use it and to achieve those goals. So that people-centric approach is something that we look at quite significantly as well through our products, and we can see there the outcomes that we're achieving with our products as well. And just before we open things up there, to help us help you as customers, facilitate all of that, these number of products here, help align with everything that we've spoken about too. That being said, I will open it up now. So if you do have any questions, I think everybody now should be off mute. If not, we will get everybody off mute now. So if you want to raise your hand, feel free to, and I will unmute you and you can ask Jon anything that you like. Or even if it's in the chat, we can monitor the chat as well. So we do have a few minutes.
We've got one question in the chat already. So perhaps if I just respond to Heather first.
Yeah.
So a question about how we provide. Can I provide a few examples of personalizing that doesn't put the company at risk? And that's. I mean, the point about risk, I think, is really interesting, because in a sense, anything, as soon as you sort of you give more autonomy to people, I don't know, the sort of there's an interesting risk reward relationship, I think, because by doing that you potentially get higher rewards, because when people are intrinsically motivated, they generally perform better than they do if they're sort of simply being told what to do. But yes, there is a corporate risk that potentially because you're giving control and autonomy, you can't guarantee it's going to happen. So I think it's just sort of moving to a new way of operating, where rather than sort of managing everything and controlling everything, you're liberating things, but putting in guardrails to ensure that things still happen. So I think that's part of it. But in terms of the more specifics, technology definitely has a part in this. So in the sort of HR space, I think we're seeing the greatest amount of personalization in learning to support a learning, sort of more personalized learning experience, where AI tools are helping individuals get a very different learning interface from their system, depending upon what the AI understands about their own personal interests and ways of learning and so on. So that's definitely one. There's that experience I gave you for my own time as a HR director, where we actually talked to people about what they wanted to achieve and tried to deliver that. Which again, well, okay, the risk there is that if you start to talk to people about what they want their experience to look like, that you've then got data to respond to it. But if you don't respond to it, that's sort of more dangerous than not talking to people in the first place, because you're sort of translating a vague desire into a firmer expectation. So the best thing to do is to ask people what they need and then deliver it. The worst thing to do is to ask people what they need and then ignore it. So only ask people if you're prepared to actually do the hard work of the personalization.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Heather. Thanks for the question. Great question, and for the response. Now, we do have another one, Jon, from George. First of all, great insights shared, so tick to you. So George says that we stand on the tools, how to create a social organization But what about people or HR that will lead the change? How should the HR professionals change their skill sets or competencies or leadership skills to adapt to the new normal? There you go.
Yeah, look, and you know, so I work mainly
Great.
in HR, but I've been going back to the sort of the enterprise 2.0 days. You know, I seek out and I do attend and speak at quite a few conferences around IT, enterprise 2.0, digital workplace experience, and so on and so on. So I know that when I go to those conferences, I get a huge amount of grief about HR, because I know not all HR people are connected to this agenda and they're not leading it in the ways that they should be. There are some great HR people around as well, you know, in some organizations, the future work's been led by IT, communications, wherever you're from. In many organizations, that's being done by HR. I go back to the point I made previously. We all need to connect and collaborate much more than we have previously. It needs to be a team effort. If your HR person isn't playing, have a chat to them. Let them know what's happening. Get them to connect with me. I'll have a chat to them.
That's a great segue. It's a great segue, John. Where should people connect with you? How do people find you so that, if they do have any questions or want to consume any of your previous talks or things like that, then where can they find you?
I'm fairly easy to find. So I'm Jon Ingham, Jon Ingham. So I'm Jon Ingham at Twitter, Jon Ingham at LinkedIn. My academy is joningham.academy, and so on. Maybe LinkedIn, and certainly if anybody, and apologies, I just think this is such an interesting agenda. So again, Daniel, thank you for having me on, and sorry if my answers have been a little bit extra long on occasion, perhaps. So apologies, particularly to those of you if we, because we have, I guess, run out of time. If you do have any questions that you've not been able to ask me, please just connect on LinkedIn, and very happy to continue the conversation there.
No, it's been fantastic, John, and look, everybody. I'm sure everybody has appreciated everything all the content that you've just shared there. Some great insights, and you've done a lot of research and content production around this topic. So we're very privileged to have you on board for this session. Hope that was very valuable for everybody that has joined live. And also for everybody that is watching the recording. I hope that brought you some value. Go and connect with John online, ask him some questions if you want to follow up with him. As you've seen, he's more than willing to share his insights and thoughts. So go out there and ask away. So thanks everybody for joining. We will wrap things up there. But yeah, once again, John, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Daniel.